Hello there. Many of you who follow my channel will remember a video I made not so long ago called Comparing Cults, in which I urged you to look at 3 documentaries, 2 of which are by Louis Theroux for the BBC and deal with the Westboro Baptist Church, and one of which was filmed for Channel 4 in the UK about Mormons, and it's called Meet the Mormons, not to be confused with the Mormon film called Meet the Mormons, which is just a propaganda film. Anyway, I made a video urging people to watch those documentaries and specifically recommending that you use those documentaries if there's an opportunity to try and help indoctrinated witness family, friends and relatives. Well, I'm now pleased to say that there is another documentary I can recommend about the Church of Scientology, and it's called Going Clear. And I'm going to put a link in the description because this recently aired on HBO, but it is available to watch on the internet, or you can watch it on the internet if you know where to find it, and there's one link that I can recommend in the description below. Now, this is a fascinating documentary because before it came out, there was a book written by Lawrence Wright called Going Clear, Scientology, Hollywood and the Prison of Belief, or something along those lines. And Lawrence Wright is a respected investigative journalist who has written on a range of subjects in the past, but turned his attention to Scientology. And he really did a fantastic journalistic job of pulling all of the information together, interviewing as many people who'd been involved in Scientology as possible, and just giving a very non-bitter, non-confrontational, unbiased, neutral, objective look at what Scientology is. And by the end of the book, you know, it's not... you've come to the conclusion that Scientology is a cult. I can remember reading it and thinking, wow, I had no idea Scientology was that bad. So please watch that film because you won't be disappointed. It's absolutely fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's now in my trilogy of 3 must-see documentaries that do not mention Jehovah's Witnesses once, but are fantastic at helping to highlight some of the common denominators between cults. So you see, when you watch these documentaries, the black and white thinking, the us versus them, the dogmatism, the basing things on pure fantasy and belief and not evidence. You see all of those components, but because Jehovah's Witnesses aren't mentioned, then hopefully your Jehovah's Witness relatives will be able to watch it without feeling as though you're necessarily criticizing their beliefs. But rather than just make a video telling people to watch a documentary, I thought, hey, why don't I do like a Jehovah's Witnesses versus Scientology video where I compare the 2 organizations, because I've done 1 or 2 interviews now with various people, and the latest example I can think of was on the David Pakman show, and Scientology nearly always comes up because people are now realizing Jehovah's Witnesses are a cult, and the most famous example that people can think of a cult is Scientology. So I'm being asked more now, I think, about what my views are on Scientology, and I thought, well, why don't we do a video where we compare Jehovah's Witnesses versus Scientology? Which cult is the maddest, baddest, meanest cult? And spoiler alert, I actually think that Jehovah's Witnesses are a far more damaging cult for reasons I will explain. I will put my case across and leave you to decide. But yeah, it all boils down to size. Size matters in my opinion. But let me just go through a number of key areas in which I can compare Jehovah's Witnesses and Scientology, and I'll start with the founders. So Jehovah's Witnesses can trace their origins back to Charles Taze Russell, who started the Bible Students in 1879 but his organisation didn't really become Jehovah's Witnesses until 1931, when it was rebranded Jehovah's Witnesses by Joseph Rutherford, who took over from Charles Taze Russell when Russell died in 1916. There was a bit of a leadership coup, and Joseph Rutherford took over, and in 1931 the organisation was renamed Jehovah's Witnesses. So those are the origins of Jehovah's Witnesses. Scientology is a much younger religion. Scientology was started by L. Ron Hubbard back in 1953. So it's a very, very comparatively recent religion. So, how many Scientologists are there? This was something I was quite interested in, because I wanted to know, in terms of big bad cults, where does Scientology rank? And you actually hear in the Going Clear documentary, you hear the number 50,000. Now, I've actually heard lower numbers than that. On Tony Ortega's fantastic blog, The Underground Bunker, he has an article where a high church official, or someone who was once a high church official, said that there were 40,000 Scientologists. And I've spoken to John Atack at a conference, and he said that he reckoned it was more like 25,000. But I'm happy to take 50,000. If that's the number we're going to work with, it's a nice round number. Let's assume there are 50,000 Scientologists. Okay. There are 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses. There's no real comparison there, is there? And just to kind of drive that point home, there are more Jehovah's Witnesses in Mozambique than there are Scientologists in the entire world. There are just over 51,000 Jehovah's Witnesses in Mozambique alone, and 50,000 Scientologists on the planet. So that's quite significant. Now, there is a difference when it comes to the ratio of church members who are involved at the highest tier of the organisation, because with Jehovah's Witnesses, we have, I'm trying to talk now as though there are Scientologists listening, which hopefully there will be. With Jehovah's Witnesses, we have what's called Bethel, and there are Bethels or branch offices or country offices basically all over the world, and it's a fairly monastic lifestyle, and you work through the week, and your main job is perhaps printing literature or translating articles or doing administrative jobs for the Watchtower organisation. And out of the 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide, there are, according to the very latest figures, 24,711 staff at the branch facilities worldwide. So 24,711. That's 0.31% of Jehovah's Witnesses work in the administrative sort of highest tier sort of clergy, for want of a better word, of the organisation. Now, for Scientology, you guys have, according to 2009 figures, which I found on Wikipedia, who knows whether these are accurate or not, but at least according to the latest available figures that I could find, there are 6,000 Scientologists out of the 50,000 working for the Sea Org, which, as the Scientologists listening will know, is like the upper echelon of Scientology that runs everything. So that's not just in America, as far as I know. That's dotted all over the world. The Sea Org is in lots of different countries, running the show for Scientology, and that represents 12% of all Scientologists. So just over 1 in 10 of Scientologists are members of the Sea Org, which is quite a big step up from the 0.31% I mentioned for Jehovah's Witnesses. So there is quite a big difference there, and that's significant because I'm going to come back to that later. So what's the difference in beliefs between Scientology and Jehovah's Witnesses? Well, it's a huge difference, and I'm going to try and do my best to explain, bearing in mind I've been a Jehovah's Witness, but I've never been a Scientologist. So if you're a Scientologist watching this video and I say something that's wrong, feel free to correct me in the comments below. But basically, Scientology is all about what they call auditing. So they believe that all humans are basically eternal beings that have once perhaps lived on other planets, and all of the problems and anxieties and issues that humans have are caused by alien spirits or thetans inhabiting their bodies and causing mischief. And the way to get rid of those thetans is by going through auditing with an e-meter, and the e-meter is there to detect when a thetan emerges, and through a series of questions they will basically try to get rid of the thetan. And so the objective of these auditing sessions is to get to a state where the human is clear of thetans, and that's when they're called clear, which is why I think Lawrence Wright's book is called Going Clear. And then once you're clear of thetans, you can become what's called an operating thetan and start advancing up the bridge by going up different operating thetan levels, or OT levels. And for each level you need to pay a lot of money. So it's kind of a pseudo-psychiatry cult, and there's no surprise to learn that Scientology is deadly against psychiatry and psychology, which are basically the competition. So they're pseudo-psychiatrists, throw in a bit of extortion and trying to get money off people, and some really, really bizarre beliefs about Lord Xenu and where thetans come from. And I'll put a link to a Scientology cartoon, South Park Scientology cartoon, which explains it hilariously better than I ever could. But that's Scientology as I understand it. Jehovah's Witnesses are quite boring by comparison in terms of their theology. But Jehovah's Witnesses are basically try to base themselves, or would say they base themselves, on Christianity. In fact, they call themselves true Christians. They believe that the Bible is the literal inspired word of God. But unlike most Christians, they believe that the only real way to understand the Bible is to be obedient to the governing body of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, who are what's called the faithful and discreet slave spoken of by Jesus, who can interpret the Bible and who can pass on, wisdom from Jehovah God. And they also believe, unlike most Christians will tell you that when you die you're going to go to heaven, and I would think the majority of Christians believe that if you're bad you'll go to hell. Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in hell. They believe that torture is not something, eternal torture is not something God is interested in doing. And they believe that only 144,000 go to heaven. The majority of good people who die will be resurrected on planet Earth. But as I've explained in recent videos, rather than being a paradise, which is how Jehovah's Witnesses portray it, this is actually a dystopia in which this paradise has been built on the corpses of billions of people who've been slaughtered at Armageddon, who've died for the crime of not wanting to be Jehovah's Witnesses. So that's the beliefs of Scientology versus the beliefs of Jehovah's Witnesses. Here I think there is quite a difference between Jehovah's Witnesses and Scientology. Basically both are cults, both are very harmful, but the difference is that with Scientology, the extent to which you can get hurt by Scientology depends on whether you join the Sea Org and sign their billion-year contract. And as I've explained previously, the Sea Org is basically Scientology's version of what Jehovah's Witnesses call Bethel. When you go to serve in Bethel, you're working at the headquarters, you're rubbing shoulders with the top brass of the organisation, as it were. You're printing literature and so forth, which is sort of similar to what they do in the Sea Org with Scientology. But I think I've read about what goes on in the Sea Org, and the abuse and David Miscavige and the hole and all of that sort of thing. And I can safely say that based on what I know about Jehovah's Witnesses, there is nothing like the brutality and harassment and savagery and indignity in Watchtower that there is going on in Scientology. And I say Watchtower kind of with Jehovah's Witnesses interchangeably, because Watchtower is the organisation that leads Jehovah's Witnesses. So now the Sea Org is a much worse, much more brutal leadership, and you'll hear about this if you haven't yet watched Going Clear. You'll learn about the Rehabilitation Project Force, or RPF, which is basically a means of punishing Scientologists who are members of the Sea Org and who have done things that are deemed wrong or have shown a bad attitude or that kind of thing. Basically live in terrible conditions as punishment. And other things have happened, such as I mentioned the hole, which is a double wide trailer at one of the Scientology facilities where senior officials were kept and humiliated. There's been talk of harassment, there's been talk of child labour, there's been talk of verbal and physical abuse. All of these things have been suffered by members of the Sea Org, but as I've mentioned previously, not all Scientologists are in the Sea Org. It's about 1 in 10 according to the figures I've got off the internet. So most Scientologists don't know about what goes on in the Sea Org. If they did know what was going on in the Sea Org, they probably wouldn't be Scientologists. So contrast that with Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's very, very... I haven't really heard of any stories coming out of Bethel that compare remotely with what I've heard about Scientology. I think that if you go to Bethel, you're obviously, wasting your time and energy serving a cult, and it can be quite monastic, as I've mentioned, quite rigid, rules for everything, but you don't really get abused. I've not heard of any abuse anyway, myself personally. I'm sure there probably are the odd stories here and there, but I've personally not come across any truly shocking stories of abuse coming from Watchtower headquarters or any of the branch offices. What Scientologists, ordinary Scientologists and ordinary witnesses do have in common is shunning. So Scientologists call it disconnection, Jehovah's Witnesses call it disfellowshipping, or in my case, disassociation. But they both amount to the same thing. In Scientology, what happens is you are labelled a suppressive person, which is the Scientologist version of apostate. You're labelled a suppressive person, and any of your friends and family who are Scientologists are told to avoid you or disconnect from you. And there's a quite emotional story about this on Going Clear, which I think is actually one of the best parts of the film, where a mother talks about her daughter disconnecting from her. So that's actually very, very close to what happens in Jehovah's Witnesses in terms of the shunning that happens when a Jehovah's Witness is disfellowshipped or disassociated. And anyone who knows my story will know that my dad and sister, who live in the UK, are currently shunning me and my wife and our little daughter, who's never been a Jehovah's Witness, purely because I've been disassociated and I'm speaking out against the organisation. So the shunning is an issue between both organisations. Scientology, I think, is worse with extortion. So the whole idea of Scientology, as I've mentioned, is that you go through these auditing sessions and you pay for those. You can pay vast amounts of money to progress up the bridge that I mentioned and go to different levels, different OT levels. And even after you leave Scientology, you might still get letters saying you owe us $100,000. That kind of thing happens apparently. That isn't really a feature of Jehovah's Witnesses. The organisation is starting to get a little bit more aggressive, shall we say, in trying to coerce witnesses into giving money as donations, but nothing remotely close to what I am led to believe happens with Scientology. And that's kind of where I have to kind of draw a line in terms of the similarities, because as I mentioned, the level of harm that happens to you as a Scientologist will depend greatly on whether you are a member of the Sea Org or not. If you're not a member of the Sea Org, it's basically extortion and shunning that you need to worry about. With Jehovah's Witnesses, you have a whole raft of things apart from shunning. You have young ones being dissuaded from going to college or university. Maybe you might have something a little bit similar with Scientology where you're only allowed to go to a Scientology school, I don't know, but it's a very, very big problem with Jehovah's Witnesses, because young ones are basically told that they need to devote all of their time, all of their energies to being a pioneer or serving Watchtower, which, as far as I know, isn't such a big deal with Scientology. After all, the richer you are and the more famous you are, the more you'll be able to give money to to the church. There's also child abuse. I'm not aware of there being a huge child abuse problem with Scientology. But with Jehovah's Witnesses, anyone who's been following the news, the recent ABC news, some brilliant investigative work by Trey Bundy will know that child abuse is a huge problem in Jehovah's Witnesses, as some very high-profile cases recently have brought to light. There's also problems with domestic abuse, and I raise that because when you are a woman in Jehovah's Witnesses and you find out that your husband is violently abusive towards you and you've married him, you basically have to stay married to him, or you can get separated, but you're not allowed to marry anyone else if both you and your husband want to continue as Jehovah's Witnesses. You are basically married to him for life, and physical violence is not considered grounds for divorce. If you were to divorce him, you would be officially divorced, but you wouldn't be what's called scripturally divorced. So you would continue in a kind of bond to this man who'd been physically abusing you for the rest of your life, or the rest of the time that you stay as a Jehovah's Witness and he stays as a Jehovah's Witness. So that's a huge problem. And there is also obviously blood transfusions. So as far as I'm aware, if you're a Scientologist, provided it's not psychiatry or psychology, you can accept pretty much any medical treatment that your doctor prescribes. But with Jehovah's Witnesses, they can die through obeying what the governing body are telling them to do. And the prohibition on blood transfusions is quite a recent thing. It only came into force in 1945. Since then, goodness knows how many Jehovah's Witnesses have died refusing blood. And equally tragic is the number of children of Jehovah's Witnesses who have died refusing blood, even though they weren't Jehovah's Witnesses, just because of the religion of their parents. So I think when you try and, it's difficult to compare two cults, but it seems to me that you look at the problems with blood transfusions, you look at the problems with child abuse, which are unique to Jehovah's Witnesses and aren't a problem with Scientologists, and then you add on the fact that, like Scientology, you have rampant shunning in the organisation, and then you factor in the fact that there are 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses and only 50,000 Scientologists. I don't think I need to argue too strongly, based on just those variables, that Jehovah's Witnesses is a far more damaging cult than Scientology, purely because the harm, the heartache, the grief, the turmoil is being exported on a much grander scale to far, far more people, and therefore has the opportunity to affect more people who aren't even in that religion. Because obviously there are people who aren't Scientologists who will still be affected by Scientology because maybe they used to be Scientologists and they've been disconnected and that kind of thing. Well, imagine that going on the scale of Jehovah's Witnesses. Imagine how many millions who aren't even Jehovah's Witnesses are still affected by it on a daily basis. So that's basically why I think Jehovah's Witnesses are more harmful than Scientology. And I was debating whether to say this, but if there are any Scientology activists watching this video, I would really like to commend you for getting to the stage where it seems to me Scientology is dead on its feet. It seems to me that the relentless exposure that you guys are giving Scientology, you know, especially with Going Clear coming out and the book and everything, I think its days are numbered, and it seems to be in its death throes as far as I can see. So my little plug, my little shameless plug, is that if any of you guys are interested in doing something once Scientology goes down, please come across to turn your attentions to Jehovah's Witnesses, because boy do we need help. Boy do we need help. So this is quite interesting, and it's something I've been thinking about quite a bit over the last day or so. How does Scientology respond to critics compared to how Watchtower responds to critics? Because you would think they're both cults. Surely they would respond in the same way when they are attacked, either by former members or by journalists. And I can honestly say, no, they don't respond in the same way. Scientology, I mean, I know it's not quite the same as it used to be, but Scientology has a reputation for being extremely litigious and piling on lawsuits on anybody who attacks it. You know, arranging for journalists or writers to be followed around, harassed. And I heard the story of John Attack. John Attack told us his story at the conference in London last year. And he basically explained that he'd been made bankrupt by Scientology, because that was the level of, that was the extent to which they went after him. And I can remember thinking, gosh, you know, I'm glad Watchtower isn't like that with ex-JW activists. And just recently, when I was planning on doing this video, I was thinking, why is that? Why isn't Watchtower as aggressive when it comes to attacking journalists and ex-JWs who are critical of the organisation? And I think there's maybe a few reasons, but I think it's at least partly due to the fact that Scientology is a very new religion, and it was founded by L. Ron Hubbard, as I've already mentioned. And a lot of L. Ron Hubbard's personality has basically been grafted into the DNA of Scientology. And L. Ron Hubbard, when you read his story as it's presented by Lawrence Wright, was a very, very disturbed individual with quite a few issues, very, very vindictive, and very, very keen on exacting vengeance and punishment against anybody who crossed him. And it seems to me that that personality has found its way into the DNA of Scientology in general. It's probably been exacerbated by David Miscavige, who obviously took over from L. Ron Hubbard. But yeah, I think that's at least partly the case. Whereas with Jehovah's Witnesses, and this is the real key difference, I think, between Scientology and Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jehovah is going to do all of their dirty work for them. So with Scientology, you don't really have a sky daddy, you don't really have a god. You're basically, the Church of Scientology is on its own. It needs to fight its own battles. It needs to get itself out of its own problems. Whereas Jehovah's Witnesses believe that they have Jehovah looking out for them, and whoever opposes them will have Jehovah to answer to. So they don't need to go out and attack me or attack Trey Bundy or attack whoever, because Jehovah's going to do it for them. I think it was kind of summed up in the Elders Manual in the section on child abuse, very famous passage where it talks about the fact that those who are accused of child abuse and there isn't a witness on hand, you should leave matters in Jehovah's hands. So the elders are basically supposed to do nothing if there isn't a witness to child abuse. And that whole expression, leave matters in Jehovah's hands, is a kind of philosophy that you constantly hear as a witness. If you have an obnoxious brother or sister in the congregation, perhaps who's an elder, perhaps a brother who's an elder, oh, don't worry, leave it in Jehovah's hands, he'll sort it out eventually. And I think that kind of complacency reaches all the way up to the top. They believe that Jehovah is the grand caretaker who will come and mop up any problems that they may have. And I think that fortunately for me and fortunately for many activists, makes them a little bit more blasé and a little less proactive when it comes to exacting vengeance on people like me. That's not to say I haven't had my run-ins with Watchtower already. I've had a few videos now taken down off YouTube, and I also had my website jwsurvey.org taken down for 24 hours after lawyers from Watchtower contacted our hosting company. But I think all of those instances, I don't think it was a case of Watchtower keeping their eye on me. I think it was basically a reaction to perhaps Jehovah's Witnesses phoning into headquarters and saying, oh, have you seen this video, or have you seen this article on JW Survey? I don't think they have teams of Jehovah's Witnesses at headquarters scouring the internet to see what the latest thing is that apostates are saying, in the same way that Scientology probably has teams of Scientologists in the Sea Org keeping an eye on Lawrence Wright, Paul Haggis, being proactive about the situation. So anyway, I've rambled on a bit, but and I hope I've not offended anyone in what I've said. I've tried to, I'm not an expert on Scientology by any means, and I await any attempts to educate me. But I am friends with Mike Rinder on Facebook and with Tory, and I've had brief exchanges with Lawrence Wright. I know probably more than a lot of people do about Scientology, having read Going Clear and that kind of thing. And I can thoroughly recommend everybody, please watch Going Clear on the link below. And if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this video and you're trying to get through to indoctrinated friends or family members, make them watch this film. Maybe say something like, maybe you encounter Scientologists when you're doing your preaching work. This would be a really useful film to watch as research so that you know what to say to them. Say something like that, I don't know. But as I've explained in my Comparing Cults video, we really need to be strategic about how we approach waking people up from their indoctrination. Confrontation is old news, it's been tried, it's failed. But if we're clever about things and we use the strategic approach that Stephen Hassan endorses, where we show them how other cults do things and let them reach their own conclusions, I think that's a very effective way of waking people up. And it might not work instantly, it might be just a gradual thing. You're sowing the seed and helping them notice in future when cult-like things happen within Jehovah's Witnesses, but it's, I think, a fantastic way of getting through to them. So I hope you've liked this video, and thank you for watching.